Section 2 of Beacon Lights of History, Volume 4, Imperial Antiquity, by John Lord. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by K. Hand. Cyrus the Great, Part 2. Croesus, his son, entered upon a career which reminds us of Solomon, the inheritor of the conquests of David. Like the Jewish monarch, Croesus was rich, luxurious, and intellectual. His wealth, obtained chiefly from the mines of his kingdom, was a marvel to the Greeks. His capital, Sardis, became the largest in Western Asia, and one of the most luxurious cities known to antiquity, whither resorted travelers from all parts of the world, attracted by the magnificence of the court, among whom was Solon himself, the great Athenian lawgiver. Croesus continued the warfare on the Greek cities of Asia, and forced them to become his tributaries. He brought under his sway most of the nations to the west of the Halys, and though never so great a warrior as his father, he became very powerful. He was as generous in his gifts as he was magnificent in his tastes. His offerings to the oracle at Delphi were unprecedented in their value when he sought advice as to the wisdom of engaging in war with Cyrus. Of the three great Asian empires, Croesus now saw his father's ally, Babylon, under a weak and dissolute ruler; Media absorbed into Persia under the power of a valiant and successful conqueror; and his own empire, Lydia, threatened with attack by the growing ambition of Persia. Herodotus says he was led to consider whether it were possible to check the growing power of that people. It was the misfortune of Croesus to overrate his strength, an error often seen in the career of fortunate men, especially those who enter upon a great inheritance. It does not appear that Croesus desired war with Persia, but he did not dread it, and felt confident he could overcome a man whose chief conquests had been made over barbarians. Perhaps he felt the necessity of contending with Cyrus before that warrior's victories and prestige should become overwhelming, for the Persian monarch obviously aimed at absorbing all Asia in his empire. At any rate, when informed by the oracle at Delphi that if he fought with the Persians he would destroy a mighty empire, Croesus interpreted the response in his own favor. Croesus made great preparations for the approaching contest, which was to settle the destiny of Asia Minor. The Greeks were on his side, for they feared the Persians more than they did the Lydians. With the aid of Sparta, the most warlike of the Grecian states, he advanced to meet the Persian conqueror, not, however, without the expostulation of some of his wisest counselors. One of them, according to Herodotus, ventured to address him with these plain words: "Thou art about, O king, to make war against men who wear leather trousers and other garments of leather, who feed not on what they like, but on what they can get from a soil which is sterile and unfriendly; who do not indulge in wine, but drink water; who possess no figs, nor anything which is good to eat. If, then, thou conquerest them, what canst thou get from them, seeing that they have nothing at all? But if they conquer thee, consider how much that is precious thou wilt lose; if they once get a taste of our pleasant things, they will keep such a hold of them that we never shall be able to make them lose their grasp." We cannot consider Croesus as utterly infatuated in not taking this advice, since war had become inevitable. It was either anvil or hammer, as between France and Prussia in 1870 72, as between all great powers that accept the fortune of war, ever uncertain in its results. The only question seems to have been who should first take the offensive in a war that had been long preparing, and in which defeat would be followed by the utter ruin of the defeated party. The Lydians began the attack by crossing the Halys and entering the enemy's territory. The first battle took place at Pteria in Cappadocia, near Sinope on the Euxine, but was indecisive. Both parties fought bravely, and the slaughter on both sides was dreadful, the Lydians being the most numerous, and the Persians the most highly disciplined. After the battle of Pteria, Croesus withdrew his army to his own territories, and retired upon his capital with the view of augmenting his forces; while Cyrus, with the instinct of a conqueror, ventured to cross the Halys in pursuit, and to march rapidly on Sardis before the enemy could collect another army. Prompt decision and celerity of movement characterize all successful warriors, and here it was that Cyrus showed his military genius. Before Croesus was fully prepared for another fight, Cyrus was at the gates of Sardis. But the Lydian king rallied what forces he could and led them out to battle. The Lydians were superior in cavalry, seeing which, Cyrus, with that fertility of resource which marked his whole career, collected together the camels which transported his baggage and provisions, and placed them in the front of his array, since the horse, according to Herodotus, has a natural dread of the camel and cannot abide his sight or his smell. The result was as Cyrus calculated. The cavalry of the Lydians turned round and galloped away. The Lydians fought bravely, but were driven within the walls of their capital. Cyrus vigorously prosecuted the siege, which lasted only 14 days, since an attack was made on the side of the city which was undefended, and which was supposed to be impregnable and unassailable. The proud city fell by assault and was given up to plunder. Croesus himself was taken alive, after a reign of 14 years, and the mighty Lydia became a Persian province. There is something unusually touching in the fate of Croesus after so great prosperity. Saved by Cyrus from an ignominious and painful death, such as the barbarous customs of war then made common, the unhappy Lydian monarch became, it is said, the friend and admirer of the conqueror, and was present in his future expeditions, and even proved a wise and faithful counselor. If some proud monarchs by the fortune of war have fallen suddenly from as lofty an eminence as that of Croesus, it is certain that few have yielded with nobler submission than he to the decrees of fate. The fall of Sardis, B.C. 546, according to Grote, was followed by the submission of all the states that were dependent on Lydia. Even the Grecian colonies in Asia Minor were annexed to the Persian Empire. The conquest of the Ionian cities, first by Croesus and then by Cyrus, was attended with important political consequences. Before the time of Croesus the Greek cities of Asia were independent. Had they combined together for offence and defence, with the assistance of Sparta and Athens, they might have resisted the attacks of both Lydians and Persians. But the autonomies of cities and states, favorable as it was to the development of art, literature, and commerce, as well as of individual genius in all departments of knowledge and enterprise, was not calculated to make a people politically powerful. Only a strong central power enables a country to resist hostile aggressions on a great scale. Thus Greece herself ultimately fell into the hands of Philip, and afterward into those of the Romans. The conquest of the Ionian cities also introduced into Asia Minor, and perhaps into Europe, Oriental customs, luxuries, and wealth hitherto unknown. Certainly when Persia became an irresistible power and ruled the conquered countries by satraps and royal governors, it assimilated the Greeks with Asiatics, and modified the forms of social life. It brought Asia and Europe together, and produced a rivalry which finally ended in the battle of Marathon and the subsequent Asiatic victories of Alexander. While the conquests of the Persians introduced Oriental ideas and customs into Greece, the wars of Alexander extended the Grecian sway in Asia. The civilized world opened toward the East, but with the extension of Greek ideas and art, there was a decline of primitive virtues in Greece herself. Luxury undermined power. The annexation of Asia Minor to the empire of Cyrus was followed by a protracted war with the barbarians on his eastern boundaries. The imperfect subjugation of barbaric nations living in Central Asia occupied Cyrus, it is thought, about 12 years. He pushed his conquests to the Laxartes on the north and Afghanistan on the east, reducing the vast country which lies between the Caspian Sea and the deserts of Tartary. Cyrus was advancing in years before he undertook the conquest of Babylon, the most important of all his undertakings, and for which his other conquests were preparatory. At the age of 60, Cyrus, 538 B.C., advanced against Narbonadius, the proud king of Babylon, the only remaining power in Asia that was still formidable. The Babylonian Empire, which had risen on the ruins of the Assyrian, had lasted only about 100 years. Yet what wonders and triumphs had been seen at Babylon during that single century! What progress had been made in arts and sciences! What grand palaces and temples had been erected! What a multitude of captives had added to the pomp and wealth of the proudest city of antiquity! Babylon the Great, the glory of kingdoms, the praise of the whole earth, the center of all that was civilized and all that was corrupting in the Oriental world, with its soothsayers, its magicians, its necromancers, its priests, its nobles, was now to fall, for its abominations cried aloud to heaven for punishment. This great city was built on both sides of the Euphrates, was 15 miles square, with gardens and fields capable of supporting a large population, and was stocked with provisions to maintain a siege of indefinite length against any army. The accounts of its walls and fortifications exceeded belief, estimated by Herodotus to be 350 feet in height, with a wide moat surrounding them, which could not be bridged or crossed by an invading army. The soldiers of Narbonadius looked with derision on the veteran forces of Cyrus, although they were inured to the hardships and privations of incessant war. To all appearance the city was impregnable, and could be taken only by unusual methods. But the genius of the Persian conqueror, according to traditional accounts, surmounted all difficulties. Who else would have thought of diverting the Euphrates from its bed into the canals and gigantic reservoirs which Nebuchadnezzar had built for purposes of irrigation? Yet this seems to have been done. Taking advantage of a festival, when the whole population were given over to bacchanalian orgies, and therefore off their guard, Cyrus advanced, under the cover of a dark night, by the bed of the river, now dry and easily surprised the drunken city, slaying their king with 1,000 of his lords as he was banqueting in his palace. The slightest accident or miscarriage would have defeated so bold an operation. The success of Cyrus had all the mystery and solemnity of a providential event. Though no miracle was wrought, the fall of Babylon, so strong, so proud, so defiant, was as wonderful as the passage of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, or the crumbling walls of Jericho before the blasts of the trumpets of Joshua. However, this account is to be taken with some reserve, since by the discoveries of historical cylinders, the clay books whereon the Chaldean priests and scribes recorded the main facts of the reigns of their monarchs, and especially one called the Proclamation Cylinder, prepared for Cyrus after the fall of Babylon, it would seem that dissension and treachery within had much to do with facilitating the entrance of the invader. Narbonadius, the second successor of Nebuchadnezzar, had quarrelled with the priesthood of Babylon, and neglected the worship of Bel Marduk and Nebo, the special patron gods of that city. The captive Jews also, who had been now nearly 50 years in the land, had grown more zealous for their own God and religion, more influential and wealthy, and had even become in some sort a power in the state. The invasion of Cyrus, a monotheist like themselves, must have seemed to them a special providence from Jehovah. Indeed, we know that it did, from the records in 2 Chronicles 36, 22, and 23. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Koresh, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing. The same words occur in the beginning of the book of Ezra, both referring to the sending home of the Jews after the fall of Babylon; the 46th chapter of Isaiah also. The Lord saith of Koresh, He is my shepherd, and perform all my pleasure. Babylon was not at that time leveled with the ground, but became one of the capitals of the Persian Empire, where the Persian monarch resided for more than half the year. Although the Babylonian Empire began with Nabopolassar, B.C. 625, on the destruction of Nineveh, yet Babylon was a very ancient city and the capital of the ancient Chaldean monarchy, which lasted under various dynasties from about 2400 B.C. to 1300 B.C., when it was taken by the Assyrians under Tig-Vathi-Nin. The great Assyrian Empire, which thus absorbed ancient Babylonia, lasted between 600 and 700 years, according to Herodotus, although recent discoveries and inscriptions make its continuance much longer, and was the dominant power of Asia during the most interesting period of Jewish history, until taken by Cyaxares the Median. The limits of the empire varied at different times, for the conquered states which it composed were held together by a precarious tenure. But even in its greatest strength it was inferior in size and power to the empire of Cyrus. To check rebellion, a source of constant trouble and weakness, the warlike monarchs were obliged to reconquer, imposing not only tribute and fealty, but overrunning the rebellious countries with fire and sword, and carrying away captive to distant cities a large part of the population as slaves. Thus at one time 200,000 Jews were transported to Assyria, and the 10 tribes were scattered over the eastern world, never more to return to Palestine. On the rebellion of Nabopolassar in 625 B.C., Babylon recovered not only its ancient independence, but more than its ancient prestige. Yet the empire of which it was the capital lasted only about the same length of time as Media and Lydia, the most powerful monarchies existing when Cyrus was born. Babylon, however, during its brief dominion, after having been subject to Assyria for 700 years, and was probably the most magnificent capital the ancient world ever saw until Rome arose. Even after its occupancy by the Persian monarchs for 200 years, it called out the admiration of Herodotus and Alexander alike. Its arts, its sciences, its manufactures, to say nothing of its palaces and temples, were the admiration of travellers. When the proud conqueror of Palestine beheld the magnificence he had created, little did he dream that this great Babylon which he had built would become such a desolation that its very site would be uncertain, a habitation for dragons, a dreary waste for owls and goats and wild beasts to occupy. We should naturally suppose that Cyrus, with the kings of Asia prostrate before his satraps, would have been contented to enjoy the fruits of his labors. But there is no limit to man's ambition. Like Alexander, he sought for new worlds to conquer, and perished, as some historians maintain, in an unsuccessful war with some unknown barbarians on the northeastern boundaries of his empire, even as Caesar meditated a war with the Parthians, where he might have perished, as Cyrus did. Unbounded as is human ambition, there is a limit to human aggrandizement. Great conquerors are raised up by Providence to accomplish certain results for civilization, and when these are attained, when their mission is ended, they often pass away ingloriously, assassinated or defeated or destroyed by self indulgence, as the case may be. It seems to have been the mission of Cyrus to destroy the ascendency of the Semitic and Hamitic despotisms in Western Asia, that a new empire might be erected by nobler races, who should establish a reign of law. For the first time in Asia there was, on the accession of Cyrus to unlimited power, a recognition of justice, and the adoration of one supreme deity ruling in goodness and truth. This may be why Cyrus treated the captive Jews with so great generosity, since he recognized in their Jehovah the Ahura Mazda, the supreme God that Zoroaster taught. No political reason will account for sending back to Palestine thousands of captives with imperial presents, to erect once more their sacred temple and rebuild their sacred city. He and all the Persian monarchs were zealous adherents of the religion of Zoroaster, the central doctrine of which was the unity of God and divine providence in the world, which doctrine neither Egyptian nor Babylonian nor Lydian monarchs recognized. What a boon to humanity was the restoration of the Jews to their capital and country! We read of no oppression of the Jews by the Persian monarchs. Mordecai the Jew became the prime minister of such an effeminate monarch as Xerxes, while Daniel before him had been the honored minister of Darius. Of all the Persian monarchs, Cyrus was the best beloved. Xenophon made him the hero of his philosophical romance. He is represented as the incarnation of sweetness and light. When a mere boy he delights all with whom he is brought into contact, by his wit and valor. The king of Media accepts his reproofs and admires his wisdom. The nobles of Media are won by his urbanity and magnanimity. All historians praise his simple habits and unbounded generosity. In an age when polygamy was the vice of kings, he was contented with one wife, whom he loved and honored. He rejected great presents, and thought it was better to give than to receive. He treated women with delicacy, and captives with magnanimity. He conducted war with unknown mildness, and converted the conquered into friends. He exalted the dignity of labor, and scorned all baseness and lies. His piety and manly virtues may have been exaggerated by his admirers, but what we do know of him fills us with admiration. Brilliant in intellect, lofty in character, he was an ideal man, fitted to be the guide of a noble nation whom he led to glory and honor. Other warriors of world wide fame have had, like him, great excellencies marred by glaring defects; but no vices or crimes are ascribed to Cyrus, such as stained the characters of David and Constantine. The worst we can say of him is that he was ambitious and delighted in conquest; but he was a conqueror raised up to elevate a religious race to a higher plane, and to find a field for the development of their engines, whatever may be said of their subsequent degeneracy. The grandeur of his character is well rendered in that brief and unassuming inscription of his, more eloquent in its lofty simplicity than anything recorded by Assyrian and Babylonian kings. I am Kurush (Cyrus), the king, the Achaemenian. Whether he fell in battle or died a natural death in one of his palaces, he was buried in the ancient but modest capital of the ancient Persians, Pasargad, and his tomb was intact in the time of Alexander, who visited it, a sort of marble chapel raised on a marble platform 36 feet high, in which was deposited a gilt sarcophagus, together with Babylonian tapestries, Persian weapons, and rare jewels of great value. This was the inscription on his tomb: "O man, I am Kurush, the son of Kambuyija, who founded the greatness of Persia and ruled Asia. Grudge me not this monument." Cyrus was succeeded by his son Cambyses, who, though not devoid of fine qualities, was jealous and tyrannical. He caused his own brother Smerdis to be put to death. He completed the conquest of his father by adding Egypt to his empire. In a fit of remorse for the murder of his brother, he committed suicide, and the empire was usurped by a Magian impostor called Gumata, who claimed to be the second son of Cyrus. His reign, however, was short, he being slain by Darius, the son of Hystaspes, belonging to another branch of the royal family. Darius was a great general and statesman who reorganized the empire and raised it to the zenith of its power and glory. It extended from the Greek islands on the west to India on the east. This monarch even penetrated to the Danube with his armies, but made no permanent conquest in Europe. He made Susa his chief capital, and also built Persepolis, the ruins of which attest its ancient magnificence. It seems that he was a devout follower of Zoroaster, and ascribed his success to the favor of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity. It was during the reign of Darius that Persia came in contact with Greece, in consequence of the revolt of the Ionian cities of Asia Minor, which, however, was easily suppressed by the Persian satrap. Then followed two invasions of Greece itself by the Persians under the generals of Darius, and their defeat at Marathon by Miltiades. Darius was succeeded by Xerxes, the Ahasuerus of the Hebrew Scriptures, whose invasion of Greece with the largest army the world ever saw properly belongs to Grecian history. It was reserved for the heroes of Plataea to teach the world the lesson that the strength of the armies is not in multitudes but in discipline, a lesson confirmed by the conquests of Alexander and Caesar. On the fall of the Persian Empire, 300 years after the fall of Babylon, and the establishment of Greek rule in Asia under the generals of Alexander, Persia proper did not cease to be formidable. Under the Sasanian princes the ambition of the Achaemenians was revived. Sapor defied Rome herself, and dragged the Emperor Valerian in disgraceful captivity to Ctesiphon, his capital. Sapor II. was the conqueror of the Emperor Julian, and Chosroes was an equally formidable adversary. In the year 617 A.D., Persian warriors advanced to the walls of Constantinople, and drove the Emperor Heraclius to despair. Thus Persia never wholly lost its ancient prestige, and still remains, after the rise and fall of so many dynasties, and such great vicissitudes from Greek and Arab conquests, a powerful country, twice the size of Germany, under the rule of an independent prince. There seems no likelihood of her ever again playing so grand a part in the world's history as when, under the great Cyrus, she prepared the transfer of empire from the Orient to the Occident. But what has been, and she has had her hour. Authorities. Herodotus and Xenophon are our main authorities, though not to be fully relied upon. Of modern works, Rawlinson's Ancient Monarchies and Rawlinson's Herodotus are the most valuable. Rogozin has written interesting books on Media, Persia, Assyria, and Chaldea, making special note of the researches of European travelers in the East. Ferguson, Layard, Sayce, and George Smith have shed light on all this ancient region. Johnson's work is learned but indefinite. Benjamin is the latest writer on the history of Persia, but a satisfactory life of Cyrus has yet to be written. End of section 2.